Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you by Dollar Shave Club. Right now, for just $5, you can get your Dollar Shave Club starter set. Go to dollarshaveclub.com/martini. A little bit more on them in the podcast coming up. And, Jim, let's start with the good news. A pretty good night for conservatives at the primary polls, especially in Florida and Arizona last night. There were certain races a lot of people were watching, and in addition to just general turnout, Republican voters turned out in bigger numbers in both states, which is always nice to see. Rick Scott obviously dominated his primary, no surprise there. So he is now officially the GOP nominee to run against Bill Nelson. I don't think too many people are surprised that Ron DeSantis won in Florida. I think they're probably surprised he won by 20 points. He really attached himself to Trump's hip there, so we'll see if that becomes a liability or an advantage for him going forward. The big surprise in the governor's race there is that Andrew Gillum, the socialist mayor of Tallahassee, got the nomination over Gwen Graham, the former congresswoman and daughter of Bob Graham. She was expected to be the nominee. Gillum was way back in almost all the polls, but he got the nod from Bernie Sanders late in the game and ended up becoming the nominee. So you've kind of got the two different polls there on the Republican and Democratic side running for governor in Florida. Over in Arizona, Martha McSally easily beats Joe Arpaio and Kelly Ward, which has a lot of people at the NRSC exhaling today. She's still a slight underdog against Kyrsten Sinema, but the Republicans at least have a decent shot at that race. And Jim, perhaps most exciting to you, Alan Grayson slaughtered in the Democratic primary to regain his seat in Florida's 9th congressional district. So overall, we'll take it.
Greg, I don't know about you, but I always like seeing the headline, "In reversal, woman beats Alan Grayson." By the way, it's kind of a really interesting observation that we live in an era with, obviously President Trump, but we've seen a lot of other outrageous candidates who are known for saying things that shock people, often outraged people, lacking in the social graces and decorum that were traditionally part of U.S. politics. There's always this kind of hard-fought, impassioned debate, but not name-calling. And yet Alan Grayson goes down. Democrats say they want a fighter and they hate Trump, et cetera, but there was not an appetite for Grayson in a comeback. Some folks might argue that Arpaio is a roughly equivalent figure on the side of the right. A couple other kind of jump out at the results the other night. Look, I don't think there's any dispute that McSally gives Republicans the best shot to win the race. And in fact, Ward or Arpaio would have made it almost unwinnable. Very intriguing set of circumstances, and people kind of ask, if you had had only Ward against McSally or only Arpaio against McSally, would this have shaken out differently? McSally still won a majority of the vote, but it probably would have made a more stressful primary night for Republicans. So kind of an interesting advantage there of the outrageous egomaniacs coming in clusters and then dividing the primary electorate. In Florida, it's interesting. There are folks in Florida who will tell you, don't let the national numbers fool you. This is a state that only certain kinds of Democrats can win. It's perceived as a purple state, but it's really fueled by the fact that Obama won twice. This has actually been trending Republican quite a bit. The 2014 midterm elections certainly made the state look deep ruby red. The joke going around was that Florida is the new Texas. By the way, if Florida is the new Texas, I guess that would make Texas the new Wyoming, and I just don't even know what Wyoming would be on that scale. But you end up with a situation people say, look, actually outside the presidential races, this is actually a pretty Republican state. The mayor of Tallahassee is probably not going to be the most natural base for Democrats. Neither candidate has much of a tie to Central Florida. Neither candidate has much of a tie to South Florida. It's geographically a strange set of circumstances. I think you look at the numbers in the Senate race that have fairly consistently shown Rick Scott either slightly ahead or pretty much neck and neck with incumbent Bill Nelson. Look, if there's going to be this anti-Trump wave that's going to drive out Republicans from office, it's not really showing that much in Florida. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, we'll see what happens on Election Day. The other thing worth noting is that this perception of Florida is a purple state. Trump won it by more than 100,000 votes. That's a fairly sizable margin. Yes, it's a big state, lots of votes in here, but it wasn't Bush Florida 2000 type close. It was 112,911 in the final vote. So I don't think that the toxicity of Trump, the drawbacks of Trump, are going to hurt Republicans in Florida as much as they might in other states. So a lot of time ahead, but it is kind of interesting that Nelson's having the problem, and you're not hearing that much about, Democrats think they can pick up a slew of House seats in Florida. So you add it all up. We are pretty much at the end of the primary season, and I think Republicans by and large have gotten the candidates they wanted, which is by no means a guarantee heading into this cycle.
There was no way that Ward or Arpaio had a chance in the general. I wouldn't have minded seeing a more conservative alternative in that race, but McSally at least gives the Republicans a fighting chance to hang on there. In Florida, Jim, we're just seeing news over the wire here that we could have a George Allen moment in the DeSantis race. The vote's not even certified there yet. He went on Fox News this morning. Democrats are making a big deal out of the fact that they haven't had the governor's mansion in 20 years since Jeb Bush won there in 1998. The Republicans have had it ever since. DeSantis goes on Fox and Friends this morning and says, "Don't monkey this up by electing the socialist mayor of Tallahassee. Andrew Gillum is black." So I don't know if this is going to turn into a macaca moment, but it's certainly not the way we want that campaign to start out for the general election.
Couldn't say mess it up.
All right.
Foul it up. Louse it up. There are a lot of good words there. A lot of good alternatives. Had to pick that one, huh? Whether it's a dog whistle or whether people treat it as a dog whistle, interpret that, but not the note you want to start this off with.
No. Clean it up. And if we want to clean it up, we can go to Dollar Shave Club. No matter what you do in the bathroom to get ready in the morning, Dollar Shave Club has everything you need to look, feel, and smell your best. They have amazing shower stuff, hairstyling products, toothbrushes and toothpaste, and of course, razors and shave supplies. As I mentioned a couple months ago, they sent me a big box of stuff, and I've mentioned a few of the different products that I've had the chance to use. One of the ones I've been using lately is their toothpaste. I believe it's called Superba, but the flavor is Peppermint Kick. And if you know anything about Dollar Shave Club, they don't go mild on things like this. It's a really revitalizing way to wake up in the morning. It's a quality toothpaste. I've enjoyed it very much. Unfortunately, the tube is almost empty, Dollar Shave Club. So go ahead and send some more if you'd like to. But from toothpaste to the shower gel to the bar soap to obviously the razors and the shave lather and the shave butter, all of it really, really good stuff.
Now, that's how we get ready. But maybe you're not like us. You have your own way to get ready in the morning. So you might shave your whole body to get ready for a bike race. Again, that's not us. But Dollar Shave Club's executive razor and shave butter can help. Or you might want to do your hair to get ready for a soccer match or touch football or flag football or something like that. Boogies by Dollar Shave Club can help you get your style right. The thing is, no matter what you do to get ready, Dollar Shave Club has everything you need.
And right now, you can get ready with an amazing deal on any one of their starter sets. I personally recommend the Daily Essential Starter Set. I love the Amber Lavender Body Cleanser, but you can't go wrong with any of them. Head over to dollarshaveclub.com/martini to pick your own Dollar Shave Club starter set for just $5. After your starter set, products ship at regular prices. And make sure you check out their new video, too. It's all at dollarshaveclub.com/martini. dollarshaveclub.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's move on to our bad martini, and it is a follow-up to one of the ugliest martinis we've ever had. David French and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago while you were on vacation, but obviously you're aware of the report from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office that came out chronicling decades of abuse by priests in Pennsylvania in 6 different dioceses, I think it was, and the systemic cover-up from bishops and cardinals. It's just one of the ugliest things you could ever possibly read, and you really can't, in good conscience, do it in one sitting. So there's been a lot of back and forth about what needs to happen now. There was a former papal nuncio, the envoy to the U.S., who says that Pope Francis knew about the abuse of former D.C. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick back in the day and never actually inflicted much punishment on him. Now we've got reaction to this latest part of the story from a cardinal in Chicago. NBC 5 in Chicago has the story.
Cardinal Blaise Cupich responds to questions whether disgraced Cardinal Theodore McCarrick lobbied for Cupich's promotion to Chicago.
It's not as though I just fell out of the sky.
McCarrick's influence detailed in a bombshell memo from Archbishop Carlo Vigano, the former Vatican envoy to the U.S.
The Pope has a bigger agenda. He's got to get on with other things of talking about the environment and protecting migrants and carrying on the work of the church. We're not going to go down a rabbit hole on this.
There are calls for Pope Francis to resign because of Agano's testimony that Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis knew of allegations McCarrick abused seminarians and was still promoted to become a cardinal.
The record shows that whenever there's actionable information, Pope Francis acts.
The cardinal suggests a personal bias against the Pope.
Quite frankly, they also don't like him because he's a Latino.
Jim, there's so much here. First of all, he's not a Latino. He's from Argentina, but his parents are Italians. Obviously, Francis doesn't necessarily act, if this report is anything true. But worst of all, how is cleansing the church of pedophile priests and cover-up bishops and cardinals a rabbit trail compared to the environment and migrants?
You know what's kind of baffling about this, and really probably deeply disturbing on so many levels, what we're seeing within the church is, you might argue, a parallel to what we've seen in American culture as a whole. The country has real problems, indisputable, and you can take your pick, whether you want to say it's an insecure border and illegal immigrants, whether you want to say it's crime, whether you want to say it's lack of economic opportunity, persistent poverty, foreign threats, a less safer world, terrorism. We've got real problems that people on both sides of the aisle can and should recognize are real problems. And yet, if you look at the general political discourse on any given day, it's very little, hey, how can we work together on solving the problem? It's very much, the problem is that party over there secretly wants the problems, or something like that. What we're seeing here, this is the sort of scandal that should make every Catholic, and I think probably every human being, should make their skin crawl, right? Recoil and rise up in anger, saying, look, no more of this administrative leave, shuffling priests around, being very hush-hush about it, not mentioning it. Look, these are crimes. And if you commit a crime, you should be in a court of law, have your guilt determined. And if you're found guilty, you should serve your time. You should not be said, oh, well, we're just going to limit his access to young men or something like that. There's a usually really darn funny satire site called the Babylon Bee. Picture it as a more Christian-focused version of The Onion. And a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was August 16th, they did a parody story saying, quote, Pope says he will address sex abuse scandal once he's finished talking about climate change. And you laugh, but there's a little bit of a sting to it, because that kind of there was kind of this general sense of, we are hearing these jaw-dropping, shocking. I mean, it's not just, we got used to the problems of sex abuse in parishes back in the 90s, and particularly in the early 2000s, the Boston Globe series, Bernard Law, all of that. But there was kind of this sense of, oh, wow, that was really terrible, but now it's been addressed. Now we've been taken about it. People are aware of it, and the church is addressing the problem. They don't tolerate that anymore. Apparently not. Apparently this has been persistent, and an enormous number of, not just like one or two, but big name cardinals. In Morning Joel, I talked about my very limited interaction with Bishop McCarrick back when he was the first bishop of Metuchen, New Jersey, where I grew up. I interacted with him as a little kid. Nothing inappropriate, nothing to indicate the horrible scandals. But when the guy you remember as being this, up on the altar, just revered figure, and being involved and having these sorts of stories around him, it's nightmarish. It's horrifying. And you'd like to see everybody, this whole big united front, that no matter how we feel about theological perspectives or priestly celibacy or homosexuality or any of those issues, sex abuse of children is never okay. It's never something we can wink and nod at, because that we perceive the perpetrator as being on our side. And as bad as the abusers are, those who turn a blind eye, or those who do not, come down upon the abusers with every possible tool, who merely shuffle them around, look, you're every bit as culpable. You were in a position to stop it, and you didn't do that. And most of us can't get our heads around what kind of mentality do you have to conclude that a certain amount of child sex abuse is acceptable in order to serve the greater good. No, it never serves the greater good in that kind of circumstance. So here we are. So then we have this letter basically saying, the Pope knew about it and didn't really do much about it, and in fact kind of loosens the restrictions on a particular bishop. And the first response was, we're not even justifying this we're not even going to even dignify this with a response. Greg, I don't know if it's a reflection of the times we live in, but I've kind of reached the point where when someone refuses to acknowledge accusations at all, it makes me think they're more guilty. Can't say that that's necessarily fair. Can't say that's necessarily always going to turn out. But, if I said, Greg Corombos is a notorious shoplifter, Greg, how would you respond? Stop spreading those lies, Geraghty, right? I mean, there'd be a little bit of like, when you say, oh, I've been accused of doing something absolutely horrible, I'm not even going to respond to it. Well, most people, when they're the subject of a false accusation, that attacks them, their reputation. They feel personally wounded by it. Again, this is by no means an admission by the Pope, but the lack of response. Then to have the bishops coming out and saying, oh, no, this isn't important enough. We got bigger problems to worry about or something like that. Look, this is going to shake the faith of Catholics, and this is going to make, you think there are a lot of lapsed Catholics now? This is what it takes to get people to stop donating. This is what gets people to go from Christmas and Easter Mass to never Mass, because they start to see the whole organization as being corrupt to the core, or perhaps even worse. Maybe it's not entirely and broadly corrupt to the core, but the corruption is so pervasive and it's so sufficiently widespread that you don't know who the good ones are. A few bad apples do spoil the bunch, in the sense that you don't know which priest, which bishop, and which Monsignor is fighting for the side of the angels on this, and which ones are okay being complicit in a cover-up. This should frighten them down to their very bone marrow. And at least so far, it does not appear they're responding, certainly not uniformly with the kind of response we want to see. It appears to be very intermittent and some really weird, suspicious, and unnerving responses.
Yeah, my initial reaction to the Pennsylvania AG report was that heads need to roll, literally, and now we can't even get it to happen figuratively. I mean, you're not going to see a red-in-the-face, podium-pounding Pope, but he could take actions, obviously, that show that they want nothing to do with this sort of thing in the church anymore. Basically, like Darth Vader at the end of Rogue One, just going through there and just rooting out everything that's in your way of getting back to just a simple level of decency, much less the type of reputation you want the leaders in your church to have. It's just absolutely despicable in every conceivable way. All right, Jim, let's move on to our crazy martini now, and less heavy than our bad martini, but still pretty darn annoying. Obviously, much of this week, there's a lot of stories going on about the legacy of John McCain, Trump's reaction to it. We discussed all of that on Monday. And one of the things that Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, announced pretty quickly after the news of McCain's passing came out, I don't know if this was on Saturday night, but it was certainly over the weekend, I think, that he suggested renaming the Russell Senate office building on Capitol Hill in honor of John McCain. Richard Russell was a longtime senator from Georgia. He was an opponent of civil rights legislation pretty much across the board. And so that was the move that Schumer wanted to make. And so he just assumed that everybody on the Republican side would be on board with that. But that's not exactly what's happening. So over at New York Magazine, Ed Kilgore, who used to be kind of a centrist Democrat, but has gotten far more left over the last couple of decades, basically is accusing the Republicans of racism here. He points out that instead of going along with Schumer's plan, Mitch McConnell on Tuesday recommended creating a task force to study ways to commemorate McCain, including the possibility of adding his portrait to the Senate reception room, which is considered a hall of fame for the most distinguished senators who have served. He then quotes the senators from the South, like David Perdue, who holds the seat once held by Russell, Richard Shelby from Alabama, Louisiana's Bill Cassidy, and others saying they'd rather have some other way of honoring John McCain. He winds up by saying, if the Republicans end up saving the Richard B. Russell Senate office building over Democratic protests, it will be a blow to the bizarre but pervasive conservative argument associated with Dinesh D'Souza and Kevin Williamson that Republicans have always been and still are the party of civil rights, while Democrats are secretly continuing their pre-1960s racist heritage. And, of course, the media is in on this as well. John Hoeven of North Dakota came on CNN this morning, Jim, to talk about trade and whether we can get Canada into this deal Trump is working on with Mexico. And here's how the conversation ended.
As you know, Senator Schumer, among others, have suggested renaming the Russell office building for Senator McCain. Do you support that?
Well, what we're going to do is the leaders already said we're going to set up a bipartisan working group to come up with the right type of memorial for Senator McCain. And I think that's a great idea. Let's get something that we can all agree on, and we'll see what that is. I don't know what that's going to be yet.
But can I get a yes or no? Do you agree that's a good option to perhaps rename the Russell office building in his honor?
We'll look at a number of options. We definitely want to do something, and we'll decide what the best option is. I'm not foreclosing any possibilities at this point.
Okay, so a non-answer right now. We'll see what comes out of that.
Jim, whatever they want to do here, they'll ultimately come up with something. But the idea that you're a terrible person because you don't want to go along with what Chuck Schumer and the media in tow want you to do is just insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think the strongest argument or something we should point out here is that if you're a Republican, why would you lift a finger to keep the Senate building named after a Democrat instead of a Republican?
Yeah.
So I'm perfectly fine. Just my sheer partisan animosity says let's rename the building. So I guess okay that having the Richard Russell Senate Office Building is a terrible historical airbrushing and honors someone who shouldn't be honored, and it's a great outrage. Greg, do we just notice that it's called the Russell Senate Office Building? That way for decades? Didn't Democrats run the Senate for a whole lot of years between now and when it was named? Couldn't they have?
And when it was named, yes.
I mean, like at any point they could have said, "Hey, we shouldn't name it after this guy. This is wrong. This is bad." And they didn't. It's however, August 29th, 2018, it's suddenly become the biggest and most important issue that anyone has ever seen. And by golly, we must do something about that. It reminded me of the state capital of South Carolina having the Confederate flag, right? The Confederate flag, which was on state capitol grounds, was erected in 1962 by the state's Democratic governor in a protest against desegregation. So technically, 1962, that could have been an issue in the time of Governor Donald Russell. Could have been the time of Governor Ernest Hollings. Hollings did ever get any grief for this? I don't recall. Democratic Governor Robert McNair? No. Democratic Governor John C. West? No. Finally, Republicans elected governor in 1975. He's followed by Richard Riley from 79 to 87, a long time. He's the first elected to 2 consecutive 4-year terms, a Democrat, who I believe went on to be Bill Clinton's Secretary of Education. Did it ever become an issue for him? No. Democratic Governor Jim Hodges. Does it become an issue? No. Only during Nikki Haley and obviously during the horrific, it became an issue in the 90s and in the 2000s, but only became, Republican, why won't you do something to undo this act by your Democratic predecessors? And it only becomes an issue once the Republicans are in position to fix this terrible act by their Democratic predecessors. Look, rename the building, or if you don't, say, Greg, if lawmakers want to not have the building named after Russell any longer, that's fine with me. In fact, if you want to tear down the name of every single Dixiecrat and every other person who opposed civil rights legislation from back then, go right ahead. West Virginia's got a long list to go. Right, a lot of Robert Byrd stuff's going to have to come down after all that. And if they want to do that, fine. And then there's a separate issue of who should we name it after? Is John McCain the best person? I'm open to that argument. As mentioned earlier in the week, I'm a fan of John McCain. But I also do kind of believe that you probably shouldn't rename things in a rush, in a great hurry. You probably should measure major figures from history, their accomplishments and their sins, and decide who does. I don't mind taking down Confederate statues. I think it's great that Richmond honored Arthur Ashe. And other great figures from the city's history who probably deserve the spotlight and commemoration, and to people to look up upon someone literally upon a pedestal, a bit more than Confederate generals or segregationists or folks like that. But man, oh man, the political opportunism on here is just utterly transparent and kind of insufferable, all things considered.
I have the perfect solution here, Jim. Rename the Senate Press Gallery after him.
The
press loved him.
Where he was most beloved, Greg?
He was most beloved. As far as I can tell, looking it up online, it's not named for anyone right now. I think it's a perfect compromise.
Works for me. And look, there are lots of other lawmakers I'm fine with naming stuff after other than Russell.
Yes, exactly.
You want to take Democrats' names off buildings? I am with you. All right. Get started in West Virginia.
Amazing that they just have no appreciation for their own hypocrisy on this. Jim, we'll do it all again tomorrow. Talk to you then.
Looking forward to it, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget to visit our good friends over at Dollar Shave Club. Get your starter set, dollarshaveclub.com/martini. And tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.